So let me invite and introduce George Bina, our sponsor, and he will present you interesting talk about legal documents and how they can be improved using the XML technologies.
Thank you, Ilka. Hello again, and seeing Nick's presentation, I think mine should have been first, because it's a lot easier. It's just one. It's a use case for XML, but it's just one output format, not 18. So it's something more easier than that. So what I will present today is how it's an XML solution for legal documents. I have to confess that we didn't try a JSON solution first. So we just jumped to XML. But it is a real use case for XML, how we use this in our company to maintain the end-user license agreements. How many of you work for a software company? Right. And how many of you have license agreements for, if you don't work for a software company, you may still have this kind of agreements for other type of products, right? Not so many, but I think that even if you don't have exactly this type of documents, you may still find this interesting, the idea, and you may find that it applies to your documents as well. So all the work we've done is available as an open source project with Apache 2.0 license on GitHub. So you can just check that out. And so let's see what is the problem we tried to solve. As a software company, we have a number of products. And these products are similar in some ways, right? So we have oXygen, and it has oXygen XML Editor, developer, and author. The author is tuned for content authors, the developer for developing part, and the editor contains everything. So also from this diagram, you see that there's a lot of overlapping between these products. And they are available under different licensing conditions like academic, professional, enterprise. And the academic licenses can apply not only to a user, but also to a university, for instance, or a classroom. And we also have an SDK. And for all these products, we need to have end-user license agreements. And we push this on the website, and they are part also on the product. So they go in different locations also. What we used to have to solve this problem, to maintain these license agreements, was that we use the word processor and we maintain these documents. And then we save them as text and committed them on the product repository on the website. And this worked okay when we had one product, one license, and we had one license agreement. That was easy. But as the number of products increased and having multiple licensing options and different types of users we addressed to, then we ended up with a large number of documents to maintain. And we have this problem also for the documentation. and for the website where you need to present these products. And for this, we used XML to solve, this duplicate content, to try to minimize the duplicate content. So if we maintain, 7, 8 different versions of these documents, which are quite similar, it was difficult to apply a change because you need to go in all these documents and make sure you don't miss one place, and then you have inconsistent information. In one you say something, in the other document you say something else. And the idea was, let's try to look at an XML solution also for these legal documents as we do for the website or for the user guide. But the objectives in this case were to be something really simple. A very simple XML language with a user-friendly interface. For legal documents, you need to have support for reviewing those documents. You need to be able to get feedback from other people that will look over that document. So we need to have also collaboration and review features like annotation, change tracking, and highlights. And then at this point, basically, we will have an equivalent solution with what we had before, but XML-based. And then we should start what single sourcing concepts like conditional content, reuse, and also support for handling references in the document. And of course, we wanted also to automate the publishing tasks. So for the language, we have 10 elements. And this allows that at any moment, the user will not have more than 3 choices, basically 3 valid choices in any place in the document. So it's easy to create such documents. Also, if we look at the diagram, the whole schema is described in just this diagram. So you can just look at the schema and understand what's going on there. I looked, and also at some point we looked at if there's a standard format. But I think there is an initiative under Oasis to develop something, but it's not that. I mean, we didn't want to have 100 elements, and we just wanted to have something very easy. And also the idea of this presentation is that you can create a simple XML vocabulary without much effort and solve a real problem. So basically what we have an end-user license agreement element that has an info title. The info probably should be removed because we don't have anything inside that, so we should get these to 9 elements. An important section, and then 0 or more sections, and an addendum at the end. A section contains a title, then a number of items or a list of items. And the item can contain additional lists, references, and then we have this phrase element that allows us to set some specific attributes for a part of the content. As attributes, we have only 3 main attributes in the schema. It's a revision date. For the list, we have a numeration that specifies it should be numeric or alphabetical list. And for the ref element, we have a ref ID attribute. For the user interface, we use CSS to render the XML document. We can provide multiple CSS style sheets. The CSS specification allows to provide alternate CSS style sheets. So we can have multiple style sheets to focus on different parts of the document. The CSS is not that complex. It just styles the titles, the blocks, and there is some support for lists and counters for the sections. And we can provide also some custom actions for this to allow users that are not familiar with XML to easily insert a section, an item, just by pressing a button, don't care, without, without being important where they are in the document. They can have the card anywhere, they press a button and they get a section in the following place that is available. Many XML tools provide review support, change tracking, annotations. We also added in 14.2 highlights. There is no standard form to record these changes, but Robin from Delta XML will present probably later today or tomorrow that there is an initiative under W3C to try to get to a standard format to record this information. Right now, each tool comes with its set of processing instructions, but the advantage is that it just works for any XML format. So you don't need to change or add some specific attributes or elements in your schema to have this support. It just works. So up to here, defining a schema with 10 elements, defining a CSS which is less than 100 lines, and reusing basically the review support, we have more or less an equivalent with the word processing application, and something that can be used also by non-technical people. Now, moving forward, we wanted to actually solve the problem we started with and have conditional support and being able to include fragments from other documents. Because reuse has two facets, right? You can either have one document and just specify some parts that are different for different deliverables. So from this document, I can cover, and we have an example where in our end user license agreement, we obtain 7 deliverables out of this document that only specifies the parts that are different from each, for each deliverable, for each output that we want. And then you can have the normal reuse where you get the content from maybe another document and use a section, an entire section, for instance. You want to reuse the termination section, right? It may be the same in all your agreements. So for conditional content, as we have different products, different editions, and different ranges that we address, we added 3 attributes in the schema. That one is product name, range, that can be user, classroom, departmental, site, and edition, which is the license type, academic, professional, enterprise. And by setting such an attribute on an element, we specify, for instance, if you set edition equals academic on a section, then that section will go only if the deliverable matches the academic edition. So we added these profiling attributes to a number of elements that we want to be able to specify different content based on these attributes. And in the user interface, we can select to focus on a specific deliverable, and then the parts that are excluded fade out. So you can see here that only this part, the deliverable matches product equals author, and the different values for product, they fade out in the user interface. This is just to help, when you look in the document, you can focus on a specific deliverable, and you can see what will go into that deliverable. For reusing fragments, we decided to use XInclude. Some vocabularies like DITA, they define their own attributes or their own mechanisms for having these content references. DocBook is using XInclude. So we decided to stay with XInclude to reuse the existing support both in the authoring tools and in the processing tools. Because XML parsers already know, Xerces, for instance, already knows XInclude, and you don't really have to care much about that. But when you work with XInclude, you need to take into account that some attributes will appear in the resolved content. So if you include an element, you may get an XML base as part of the base URI fix-up done by the XInclude processor. So you need to come back to the schema and allow XML base on the elements that you expect to be included with XInclude. And we added XML based on these elements, on the sections, basically. So we got right now a solution that has this support for reusing content. And the advantages are, of course, the obvious advantage of avoiding duplicated content and being easier to maintain. We also seen that it was really easy for us to review the SDK agreement because all the included sections were already reviewed. We included in the SDK agreement sections from the end-user license, normal product end-user license agreement. And when we had to review the SDK, half of it basically was already reviewed, and because those sections were X-included, and we didn't have to review them again. We knew that they were reviewed when we looked over the end-user license of product end-user license agreement. Now, if you refer to another section or to an item in the document, when you make changes to the document, these references may get broken, right? You add another section, then all the numbers, for the following section will increase, right? And if you had a reference to such a section, then you need to change that as well. And this can appear also more when you have profiling and you conditionally add the section for a specific edition. So in some deliverables, you get different numbers and compared with other deliverables. So and here it's a real example from an end-user license agreement where we see that they refer to chapter 12 notice, and then the chapter is 14 actually in the agreement, and probably they don't use conditional processing. It's just maintained as text, but it shows that it's very easy to have such an error. So if you take profiling into account and you have references, then you need to profile also the reference text similar with what happens in each deliverable. And so it gets quite complicated. So we added this ref element with an ID, and we allow some elements to have an ID defined on them. So with this ref element, we can just point to an existing ID in the document. This has the advantage of automatic validation, right, as part of the ID-ID-ref support from XML. And if you have changes in a document, the references are basically anchors, so they just move and you still have the reference pointing correctly to that place. And we added XML ID attributes then to be able to define these anchors in the document to a number of elements. And a problem here is how do you change these references, because usually there are the anchor and the reference, there are attributes. And for this we added an alternate CSS style sheet, and some of you that were yesterday at our meetup seen that we have this form support in oXygen that works through some CSS extensions that allow to make these attributes visible in the user interface. So basically I can just change a CSS style sheet and I can get these places for entering IDs, for items, sections, and then when I have a reference I can just select from the drop down one of those IDs, one of the defined IDs. For the publishing part, we used XSLT, splitting the processing in different stages. But all these are, just a couple of lines of XSLT that just do one stage in this processing. So we still have an X-include resolution, but that's not needed. It's just if you use an XML processor that doesn't support X-include. Then we solve the profiling, and then we resolve references, and then we apply the final conversion. That can be, right now it's to text, but then you can plug some other module there to convert to PDF or XSLFO, PDF or HTML or whatever. We use Ant to trigger the XSLT processing, and in our original project that's not part of the open source project in GitHub, we also have Ant tasks that automatically push the generated end-user license agreements on the oXygen project SVN repository and on our website repository. So we can basically just say Ant, and all the changes are in all places synchronized exactly the same thing. And let me see. So here we have the oXygen end user license agreement. You can see here some comments that we made to this document. Here we have some conditional sections, and here we have the deliverables. For instance, if I want to focus on the author code, the author license agreement, oXygen XML author license agreement, then this fades out. It's not part of that deliverable. Then if I want to see the academic side, I get some sections also from here that apply only to the site license and so on. So this is the part that uses conditional content. And the SDK agreement uses mainly X-include to bring in sections. You see like this patent and copyright indemnity section. We have 7 sections basically that are reused from the end user license agreement. If I want to transform these documents, I can just click a button, select this transformation, and I get all these outputs, right? All these documents. Here it is the CSS. As I said, it's only 88 lines of code. This is the schema. This is the main structure of the document. And we define, in a separate schema, we define our values for product names, ranges, and license editions. So basically, this is a project that you can take from GitHub and reuse it also for your own end-user license agreements quite easily. And Yeah, and here it's how we trigger each deliverable. So we just select the product to editor, user, range user, author range user, developer user, editor academic classroom license, editor academic department license, editor academic style license. So with this, we just set the profiling attributes and trigger the transformation for this document to obtain each deliverable. So some conclusions are that you should not be afraid to start a new project and keep it simple. If you have less than 10 elements, you can count them, on your fingers. It's easy. And let me show you also this part. So if I want to edit IDs, I can change to this. That shows the places where I can define IDs, or the defined IDs, I can just edit them directly in the user interface. Or if I want to add, a section, I can just click on a button like this. Or if I want to add an item, I can just do this kind of thing. And also, if I want to, let's say we go here, and if I want to include another section, we can also have an action like this, where I can say the SDK, and then I can select, a section, and oXygen will. Yeah, I need to check to see what's going on, but yeah. So basically, you can have a nice user interface even for bringing in sections or for adding things. So I highlighted here also some of the technologies we used. Right, we use CSS for the rendering part. We use X-include for references. We use ID and ID refs for managing references. We use XSLT for publishing. And I think this concludes my presentation. Thank you.
And we have time for 2 questions, I think. Over there. So it will be the second question.
From what I've seen from the requirements at the beginning of your slides, the kind of problems that you are trying to solve, and then the solutions you came up with, to me it looks pretty much like DITA, especially when you talk about profiling, references, these kind of things.
Yes. Yes.
So I wonder which are the advantages of your approach over just a plain old DITA? Is it just that I can reuse the elements, the vocabulary that you already created, or there are other advantages over DITA?
If you try to explain DITA, for instance, to a lawyer that should look over such a document, it's difficult. There are many elements. Of course, you can customize DITA, but the effort for creating a 10-element schema and customizing DITA, you cannot compare this, right? And DITA is not only XML, it's a lot on top of XML. So there are many concepts on top of XML. So we wanted something really easy, right? And also on the transformation part, if you want to plug into the DITA Open Toolkit and do such a simple transformation like we need, it's, you work maybe 2 weeks. So instead of maybe 1 hour. Yeah, so the reason we...
Sorry, it's definitely the solution for, you know, a simple solution that you can also be edited by non-technical people more easily than try to configure and install all the data stuff.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and the second question was over there. Okay, so
George, I'd just like to, you mentioned the lawyers there, and of course the most important people to review such agreements are the lawyers, and in my experience lawyers, they don't like, in fact they probably hate XML, so could you tell us how you converted your lawyers to use XML?
We don't have lawyers we didn't have, you know, the opportunity to work with lawyers on our end user license agreement, but my colleague Stefan does a really good job. He manages the license agreements, and he sends the license agreements to me and to a few of my colleagues, you know, so we can look over them. But your question is interesting, and one idea that we have is that, you know, oXygen can work also in the browser as a Java applet. So basically, it will be possible to just send a link in an email to a lawyer, and he can just click on that, and he is already in the page with reduced functionality, only the review support, so he can just, you know, highlight, add a comment, very simple things. And we'll get them back in our XML format without the need to round trip that to Word and getting back manually inside our documents.
So one very short question from Mohammed.
Yeah, it's not really a question. Just jumping on the lawyer things. I think Charles Goldfarb was a lawyer, in fact, so he probably invented all this stuff. But just a reminder. And on the point of, I think it's very interesting because it's very simple, and I think for teaching XML it's very cool. So the question is, will you put it into next edition or the future edition of oXygen in order to make it available as soon as possible? Because you put it on GitHub, but you really integrate it as a sample in the samples project.
Basically, all this configuration for working with a specific vocabulary is done in oXygen inside what we call a framework, which stores what schema is associated by CSS style sheet you can use, predefined transformations to different output formats, and all this is placed inside the project on GitHub. So if you get the project and you open that in oXygen, we have everything working. But the idea is also to extract this as a framework and be able to deploy the framework through the add-on mechanism we have. That's kind of app store where you can just select this framework and that framework, and they are installed automatically on your computer. And when you have an update, you can get a notification to update also your framework and things like that.
Thank you, but you cannot use App Store. Take care, it's a reserved word.
Like.
Yeah, but you can create special version of XML Author, call it XML Lawyer, and make it 10 times more expensive. So thank you very much again.
Thank you.